Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of whatever this is. I feel like a rock star with this mic. I'm not gonna sing because, I want to keep you guys around. This is your
We don't
host
want people
Hussein.
unsubscribing.
Yeah, this is your host Hussein, joined by our co-host Hatim. Today's topic, before I let you go off on your tangent, Hatim, is something interesting to say the least. Uh, Hatem came up to me, or he texted me rather, and he told me, let's do a topic about clothing and fast fashion and how it's bad for the environment. And the first thing I told him is that I don't want to do it because I'm going to sound like a hypocrite. And here Hatem is stunting on us with a suit as soon as we start this freaking episode. How dare you, bro?
Well, look, I came from class, and it's good. Actually, I actually dressed up this time for a topic about fashion and clothing. The main thing though I really wanted to discuss was um, I think last week or so, my wife and I are going to Primark and we're buying clothes. And I'm just thinking, Primark is pretty cheap. It's pretty good quality stuff for a decent price. And I'm just like, yeah, like all of these, and then you read like the tags, and it says Bangladesh, and it says India, and you're like, all these little kids are probably working in factories. So to all the viewers, that's our question, like the ethics of buying all these clothes that we know are most likely made by children.
First of all, it's not good quality. You pay for what you get. If it's a $5 t shirt, it's going to be super itchy and it'll shrink after one wash.
It's a decent quality, decent quality.
I mean, I don't want to be all high and mighty, but I never shopped from Primark in the US because I didn't like the feel of it on my body personally.
Really? Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, there's people like that when it comes to clothes. Like they have like, oh, it feels different and stuff. Like I just wear clothes. Like if I see clothes in front of me, I'll wear it as long as it fits. So we
why
get
such a
we get
minimalist, dude?
the viewers get very different perspectives. My perspective and your perspective. I have the minimalist perspective. You have the I want to put a little bit more effort perspective.
Yeah, so just going off on what I said in the intro, the reason why I didn't want to talk about this was because I feel like I would have been a hypocrite. Because I'm all for the clothing, not the brands, but for the style. I love Nikes, and Nike's always been in controversy with their child factories in Southeast Asia. They've always had to move factories around because of child scandal this, child labor that, prices this, and they've been tried. People have tried to boycott them so many times, but this just goes to show the power of brand, right? Like, no matter how much you try, there will be some dip in sales for like a quarter maximum, like a week. I was saying a quarter, just like that's like the absolute maximum. But like they always bounce back. They sponsor so many teams. That's another big thing, right? Like their presence is everywhere in in street fashion, in sports. Like, how can you control such a giant like that when like there's no question of ethics in this? Because if you cannot take down a brand the size of Nike, then there's nothing you can do about it. Like, so then the question arises, right? Like, do you just submit to the god of Nike or and buy their stuff? Because it's also they have a range of products, right? There's cheap, there's mid range, and then there's like the expensive shoes that you get for like $200, $300. So like, what do you do? Like, do you just bow down to them, or do you do a personal boycott, hoping that your $5 profit that they're not making from you makes a difference in the long run?
I think here's the thing is with that, and Nike's a really good example. So I'm not gonna lie, I have Nike slides that were given to me as gifts. I do wear it sometimes, um, most of the time, whenever it's easy for me to wear. The thing is, I do think about the fact that Nike does have a really bad track record in terms of their industry. So actually, I want to add this in for people just to have that thought too, that at my law school, like they do have an evaluation of companies that have some kind of human rights processing. Like we take that, and I've been a part of that where we actually like look in and just do general research on to see if they have any statements regarding human rights. So a lot of companies worldwide are not as bad as Nike. So one would argue that you can actually buy other clothes like Adidas. Adidas does have those policies. Maybe buy Adidas instead. It's still a good brand. It's not Nike. That's one option. And I don't want to just keep talking, but I do want to say that for me personally, I've always been a proponent of not blaming people for having to buy certain brands, and the reasoning is just because people need clothes. Like it's hard. You can't. Not everyone can buy very expensive clothing, and it's hard for them to actually just say, "Well, I'm just gonna boycott this." When if you need cheap clothes, if you don't make that, if you're not as well off, it's a very difficult thing to do, and it's like it's hard for me to say something that's going. I don't have much control over what's happening in India or Bangladesh or any other Southeast Asian country, but I do have control over the U.S. So and my own personal decision. So I can maybe avoid certain things, but it's very difficult. The other aspect is that there's legal. Sorry, I just want to mention that one thing that there's a legal difference too. That legally, like we have maybe $15, $16 minimum wage in certain states here in the U.S., but that living standard is very different in other countries. So even if they're making less, it might be a very different situation. Like they might be living fine by that standard, like $7 an hour, for instance.
Yeah, actually, if you look at the currency power of the dollar, that's enough to like make savings, do a lot of stuff with it. Like in India, a lot of people get away with like, how do I convert it? A few $100 a month, and they're able to take out savings for their rent, clothing, schooling, everything. And like the whole spiel you gave is kind of interesting because there's so many topics that can come out of this. Let's put a pin on the economical thing because I have a great segue into that for later in the video. But the economical thing and the environmental thing as well. But like, how do you put a stop to like if the brand can make so many if the brand has so much influence on society in terms of the social pressure? Jordans, everyone wants a pair of Jordans. Now, the cost of Jordan manufacturing is probably the same as any other shoe, like $10-15, but they go for $200-300. Like that's a lot of it's, and the success of Jordan is attributed to Michael Jordan as well as the hype all around social media. So you can talk about all the laws you want, but like you cannot stop people from buying something that they aspire to buy. Like people aspire to buy a house, people aspire to get a Lamborghini, people aspire to have a pair of Jordans, and they take care of the Jordans as if it's like gold, even though the value, depending on the Jordan, the value diminishes over time. So like, are there any, because you're a lawyer, right? Like, is there any way to like limit the social pressure of Nike and the social influence of Nike rather? I don't know how the law can make that happen.
So that's a good question, but I do want to say like I'm not a lawyer, so like I will be a lawyer, inshallah. Like I will be a lawyer, but I'm not a lawyer yet. But that's a good question, and you really can. It's honestly at the end of the day, it's about people's needs. So that's why I go back to saying that one, you can obviously petition them, Nike. You can advocate. And you can also in the U.S. you can lobby to the government. There's a lot of options that you have in just putting pressure on Nike. The main issue really is, the problem is it's hard for people to do that. Like I said before, it's because you need it. You might need those cheap clothes. Now, the high quality clothes, does everyone need Jordans? No, not really. But you can get other comfortable shoes that are just fine too. So it's, in terms of just, it's really just about putting pressure, but it's not, the reality is for Nike, it's not that everyone puts pressure on them. You know what I mean? It's that certain people want to put pressure on them. It's like if everyone in the U.S. or anyone in any country, like everyone gave like $1 or $2 U.S. dollar value, it would add up to such a big amount that you could literally do any change, but people don't. So some people just don't care. Some people don't have the connection to the two different countries to even care or to be aware of it. So the problem is like people are not coming together. You have to come together to solve those issues. Nike can you can legally put pressure, or I should say politically put pressure, and you can even say it to your congressman or senator or whatever. You can't really control much in other countries, but you can at least tell them, hey, we want better policy from you, or we won't buy it.
I mean, Nike is headquartered in the US, so like the only place you can make change is in the US. Adidas
Right?
is
Yeah.
different because they're headquartered in Germany, so
Yeah.
there's so much you can do in the US. But for Nike, especially, they're American.
Yeah.
So like,
Again, I just see it as it's not really much of an answer. I just see it as what is the sheer volume of people advocating something. Many companies obviously their job is to make profits, and but some companies do argue that they do have some duty to have like some social influence on the world too. So Nike can take the stand and say, okay, we won't do this. The thing is, for Nike, it's tough. In Nike's perspective, I don't want to say it's tough, but I want to say it's a little difficult because the issue becomes is that if they don't have cheap labor, then the prices of their clothes become so high that most people won't be able to afford it.
yeah, I mean, apart from the ethics of child labor, we know that fast fashion or fashion in the fashion industry in general is the second highest polluting industry in the world, right after oil and gas. And there isn't much you can do about people wearing a t-shirt for like a week and then throwing it because they're bored of it. And a lot of the shortened attention span or shortened appreciation is attributed to the internet. I'm not gonna lie, because you see new fashion every week, every day, and you wanna keep getting the new thing. I was watching a podcast. I think Jordan Peterson was on the Joe Rogan Experience, and he was talking about his experience in the UN, and when he had to help them write some documentation on climate change and what humans can do to better the climate. And he said from his research that the single most effective way to do that is to definitely increase the increase the wealth of the poor people and the people in poverty. And this topic can be its whole other video. But like his argument is basically, if you can give the poor, I'm not talking about like money, but like basic wealth, like the pyramid thing, right? Like shelter, food,
Yeah.
basic security of where their next meal is coming from. Then they're going to be less worried about the economics and the climate of the world,
Right.
because
So the
it,
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
yeah, like what you were saying before, if you're not going to put someone down for buying a dollar t-shirt and throwing it away because they just can't afford it, right? So like if you can cover their basic needs and all of that, because the thing with the poor is, right, they usually have like larger families, so the older people in poverty are not just worried about themselves, but they're worried about their children and their like their immediate children. So they're not worried about their children's children or the grandchildren or the lineage of their family. They're just worried about, okay, where's the next meal coming from for me, my wife, and my children. So that's why they're more short-sighted when it comes to making the world a better place. So that's just a very interesting piece of information I heard from Jordan Peterson, at least. And yeah, I just want to know your thoughts on that, because that goes into like socialism, communism, and it's a very tricky
Yeah, definitely. Like the thing is with that, that's a really good point. So both of us are technically living. If you were still in the U.S., you would still be considered a minority, and I can attest that for my parents, like as great people as they are, they don't look at such big, wide social issues. Like when they came to the U.S., they were okay. How can we work? We need to work. We need to make sure we have a place to live and we have food to eat, and etc. etc. Like very narrow like definition, and our family's okay. Like that's how you're gonna look at it. It's hard for you when you're not doing well personally. It's hard to worry about other people. It's tough. Like not saying you shouldn't. It's just harder to do. for everyone. Like you're trying to just make out yourself, let alone worry about someone who's in a whole other country that you don't see all the time. So I think that's a very excellent point, and that just brings back to the point that cheap clothes, who's most likely buying it, it ends up being many times minorities who don't make that much money, unfortunately, because they need to save money, and it's understandable. See, that's the thing. It's very understandable that you need to get cheaper clothes to support yourself. Like that's how does everyone needs clothes. Like you can't deny it.
Yeah, it's not just the minorities though. It's anyone in the middle class who aspires to look good, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes, middle
the
class can also be included as well.
especially in the US at least. In Dubai, there's only one really season. It's just hot and then a little less hot when the end of the year approaches. So like our clothing is pretty standard. You just need like a polo t-shirt and jeans and you're good to go.
Yeah.
But in the US you have so many seasons, you have jackets, sweaters. So there's always something new to buy, something new to wear and you don't feel like wearing the same thing. So that goes into the whole thing about it's not just the minorities or poor, it's also the middle class who really just want to keep up with fast fashion. And
Well,
there are
yeah,
brands
that's
out there who are positioning themselves to be like more eco-friendly.
right. So I mean, that's I've seen that too, but yeah, I'm not on social media, so I don't really see the extent of the fast fashion that people are trying to always keep up and buy new clothing. So like for us, and then again, like I want to address this only because it's important, like in our lives, and we don't want to make this a whole religious conversation, but just in general, we are taught to wear nice clothing, don't wear bad clothing. You want to wear nice clothing, you want to look good, keep that. But we're also taught to not waste our clothing as well. So maybe this is something that society needs to push a little bit more. That just reuse your clothes. That don't change every 2 weeks. You don't need like 50 pairs of jeans. Maybe get 20 pairs or 15 pairs. It's just keeping it simpler. That's something you need to teach people. Because you're right that I'm talking about minorities. They probably the thing is I don't want to put the onus on them and say they don't care, because the reality is that they probably reuse clothes longer, but people who have more money probably like, I can buy this, so let me just get it.
Exactly. Another thing is if you're bored of your clothes, don't throw them. Like you can give it to so many people. I think I don't know in the US, but over here there are like random like big boxes where you can just put your clothes in for reuse, recycling. They can give it to the poor. Many people can just reuse your clothing. And like back to the religious thing, it's not that hard to look nice. Like I think the pretext for that is don't wear shabby clothes. Like don't wear torn clothes, don't wear
Yeah.
dirty clothes. Like it shouldn't be stained. Just look neat, ironed, clean. I think that's
Right.
the bare
Exactly.
minimum you can do. If it's stained or torn, then I understand you can throw it, or then you can repurpose it, make it a cloth for your house, or I don't know what you can do with clothing. You can donate it still. Someone will still be happy to wear torn clothes if they don't have any clothes,
Yeah.
right? Like
Exactly.
there's always someone underneath you, and that's the it's a it's such a funny thing because it's a blessing in terms of your mindset. Like you're in such a good place that you can just buy a T-shirt and then forget about it after a month. Whereas it also humbles you because you know that there's so many people who can use your clothes. It's
Yeah.
just something nice to think about.
Definitely, and I think that's like you mentioned. Like, there's the boxes, there's Goodwill, there's many other places that you can donate clothes. It's just a point you don't want to go to waste, and I just think that with the environmental and the economic impacts are so great that you can just reduce the amount you're just taking in. Actually, mostly environmentally, I should say, because if you're just reusing clothes a little bit, it's gonna stop that carbon footprint for sure. Just having that, just keep it for like a year or two, even. Like it's okay if you're not wearing it, just donate it, because again, you're like just like you said, people need it, so it'll still serve a benefit to somebody.
For sure, dude. Uh, yeah, man. Like, I was asked this again, like a few months ago, that if you had $1 million, right, or if you were super rich, what would you buy? And like the first thing I thought about was clothing, but not in the traditional sense like Gucci Louis Vuitton and all those like fancy brands. I really like subtle clothing, handmade clothing from like Italy and all those places. I feel like that's way more sustainable, and also it makes you look less like a douchebag. So like that's what I prefer that, but that's so expensive. So it's really hard for a brand to penetrate the market and be a sustainable, cheap clothing company, handmade, when labor in the West is so expensive and labor in the East is cheap. But then you're manipulating them. You're abusing them. So I think I sent you a link of a company called Pangea. They're not sponsoring this video, but if you want to check them out, they say they're sustainable clothing. So there are
Yeah,
companies
I
who are
think you did.
positioning themselves in that way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, okay, yeah, okay, that's a yeah. I think you did send me. I remember seeing it because I like the thought of eco-friendly clothing. Yeah, so that's a good option that people have. I mean, again, it's gonna be a little bit more pricier, but if you're gonna wear certain clothes for maybe a year or two, maybe it's not so bad just to pay a little bit more if you can, if it's possible for you.
At the end of the day, dude, it's a mindset game. Like people just get bored of their clothes so quickly. The majority of people who are polluting the earth from clothing, are actually uh, the rich people, like or upper middle class, who can just afford to buy clothes every season and then throw them away. You just have to either get used to using a piece of clothing for a longer amount of time, or just donate it to somebody, your family, your friends, anyone in your circle, or anyone in the. Hello.
Yeah, sorry, you just cut
Yeah,
off a little
yeah.
bit.
God damn it. But yeah,
But again, it's those are all good options. I actually didn't expect us to go this route to give that whole spiel of like it's this is a good option to actually the spiel of trying to help people and just like just be a little bit more mindful yourself. I think that's a strong thing, but I do want to touch on the fact that it sometimes what happens is that in the Western world you might think, oh, oppression, 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 and then other countries are just like, okay, well at least my kid has the opportunity to work if they're not going to school. And I'm not saying that's the best thing. And again, I do still think that kids should have the opportunity to go to school. It's just that sometimes the mindset in those countries is not nearly the same as it is in the U.S. At one point during the medieval times, kids used to work more and were just like young, like small adults basically. Like there was no distinction. In our modern times, we have a bit more of a distinction that okay, kids go to school, adults work. Like that distinction's very more of a recent concept.
I was gonna bring that up actually. Like you don't know what people in Asia are going through. Like you don't know if they actually need the money or if they're doing it because it's slavery. I don't think it's slavery, but it's really hard to address this concept without having the facts in place. Because like people are so poor in some areas that they need every person in the house to be working to
Yeah.
be making food. But I think there is a greater focus on education nowadays. Like parents are forcing their kids to go to school and also do some part-time work to take care of the house. So I don't think this is just based off what I feel. Like I don't have any facts or figures to back this up though.
Yeah.
So take it with a pinch of salt.
I mean, here's the thing: is what I would just say, like, with the working conditions, you can demand having safe working conditions. Like, that's wrong for sure. But wage-wise, it's a very hard argument to make, just because a dollar somewhere else might be much, much more valuable in other countries compared to the U.S. Like that dollar makes a big difference. The standard of living is different, and a lot of times certain countries like India and stuff, like their agricultural industry is very different from the U.S. Like you have a lot more homegrown stuff that's easier for you to get comparatively. So the wages stuff is tough, but it's tough to make definitive argument that it's bad. But I would say at least for working conditions, you should make sure that everyone's safe for sure. That I don't think it's much of an argument.
But that jacks up the price for the clothes though.
Yeah,
Even a little bit of safety will make your Jordans be $600 and not $300.
Right, and they say that for other stuff too, like technology as well. But I mean, that's a little bit out of the scope of this conversation. But like, yeah, you're right. It does lead it up, but you need some safety for people. Like, you can't have like little kids going into places that will harm them like for the rest of their life. Then that's not fair. And you go back to Nike, and there's the weaker population, those Muslims in China who are made to work in camps. Like, it's tough. Like, it's a really tough thing to say. I mean, in the end of the day, I think everyone just try to do the best that you can. That's all you can really do. Or maybe we could, this podcast could start a fund to get people to stop Nike or whatever, and we just keep collecting dollars, and that's all you can really do. But money is a very strong argument to companies, and people's voices are a strong argument. Those things together are the only thing that can make effective change.
Here's what we're going to do. That's a perfect way to end the episode. If you care about the world or your children, then you're going to share this video with 50 people, and I promise any money I make from this video will go towards the charity of your choice. How about that? If you care about the world, then do it. Otherwise, all of you are selfish. There, I said it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Sounds good. I think that's a good idea. If anyone who's watching this, or anyone, whatever, if there's any money made for this, we'll just give it to a charitable organization that deals with either giving clothes donations, helping the environment, or just stopping companies from abusing kids in other countries to work.
If you've come this far in the video, comment down Nike in the comments, and I will like your comment, and I will send you a thumbs up. This has been your host, Hussein, joined by your co-host Hatem, signing off. Peace.